I'm not going to approach the subject as in a negative sense, but rather a positive. And the subject is addressed towards people who are just getting into the hobby or have been away from the hobby for a long period of time. And that is, how do I go about buying a system, or how do I go about improving my system? And one of the things that you need to learn to do is to trust your own hearing. If you can tell the difference between a fine musical performance and that which is generally done by a wedding reception band, you'll know very quickly what quality is. And you also recognize that how loud something is played doesn't make the performance better. Now, while our hearing is a bit of a bell-shaped curve, we're less sensitive at very low frequencies and not too good at upper frequencies either. That's known as the Fletcher-Munson curve. The fact that you're hearing more of a frequency doesn't mean that it is in time or proper to the performance itself. And sometimes it can actually be very detrimental. So if you pay attention to the musical side of performance as opposed to tones, you'll do quite well. The other thing you need to do is to avoid using reviews, whether they're on printed material or on the web or any other source, it could be even YouTube videos for that matter, and trusting them solely and singly as what you need to do. The reason I say that is that a lot of people who do reviews have their own things that they're looking for, some of which I do agree with, some of which I don't, by a big stretch of imagination, I suppose. And the risk you run by picking up a source and running with the first one you see is you have not taken the time to review the reviewer. And the minute you start reading them or listening to them, take the opportunity to go out and hear that product yourself. And you begin to understand what the reviewer is saying, or that you don't understand how the reviewer came to that conclusion. One of the two. But you do need to review the reviewer first. There are people out there on different news channels, so to speak, who yesterday were writing about the finest quality of spaghetti noodles you can get, and today it's turntables, and tomorrow, is Windex still the best product for cleaning windows? They're assigned tasks to do a blurb article, a sort of instantaneous, this is the flash, and tomorrow we're on to the next flash, or the best product today, sort of thing. And those people really have no idea what they're doing in terms of the evaluation process. They are writers, so they know what they're doing that way, but they're certainly not someone I would use as guidance. Oftentimes I think of them as going in for a surgical procedure by somebody who happens to be also your best car mechanic. I mean, if you have any knowledge and you look at what they're writing, you just kind of go like, where did this come from? And there's some vivid imaginations out there. So trust your own senses. Don't necessarily run with the first review, but review the reviewers. Reviews can be helpful in terms of letting you know that products exist, because not every product is everywhere. So you at least are aware of something that you may have never heard of before and is worthy of investigation. The next one, actually, and I have to praise Stereophile magazine for this one, because years ago they used to have, and I think Absolute Sound may do something similar, where they have ranking of products, Class A, Class B, levels of performance as their reviews see it. And Stereophile at one time, and rightly so, blatantly came out and said, whatever you do, folks, don't think you're building a good system by putting together a string of B class products or A class products or C, because you're going to wind up with a terrible system. And they recognize that. Reviews often focus on the quality of a given product in a given situation. And if you start changing the situations and accompanying equipment, the results can change dramatically. There are, for better or worse, a sort of incompatibility between products sonically. I don't know how else to say it other than when you put them together, you just kind of go, yikes, and it happens. So don't rely upon a recommended list of a whole range of products and just say, well, if I put this list together, I'm going to have a great system. It doesn't work that way. It certainly also ignores your listening characteristics, which you like to listen to, volume, size of the room, how you like to listen to the system. I mean, it just completely bypasses a lot of factors that should go into selecting the product that you're going to be with for a long, long time. The next thing, if you're going to really build an audio system, particularly for any length of time, is to buy quality once. And this may require a little bit of patience and sacrifice in that, you don't have a pocketbook where you can drop the big check or make the big purchase on a credit card. But what you can do is use a building block approach and to build a system one piece at a time, buying quality one piece at a time. And that will result long term in typically a very fine musical system. The thing that pains me the most is when somebody tries to hobble a system together with insufficient resources, making the mistake of buying certain products first, which only reveal all of the problems of the signal before it even gets to them. And this ends up causing the person to want to do something to straighten out the problem here, but they don't have the resources gathered yet to straighten out that problem. If they make a bad purchase, or an insufficient purchase would be a better way of putting it, and then what happens is within a year or two, they recognize that I really didn't do the job right, and so I got to replace this again. Well, nobody makes a living buying new anything and then selling it or sacrificing it a year later. I mean, audio equipment is not special in that regard, and anybody who's been in that cycle for automobiles knows very quickly that that's a good way to lead to financial ruin. And we certainly don't want to encourage that, even buying something that you're going to enjoy in your home. Typically, the biggest mistake starts out with insufficient quality in the sources. It could be a CD player, it could be a streamer, it could be a turntable, any number of things. Mediocre electronics, and then hauling off and pouring the majority of the money into the speakers. And the best way of realizing what's happening is if you have a poor signal, let's say a photograph, being blown up to this size of this blanket here, then all of the frailties of everything that's going on before is going to show up. And you're going to hear it, and it's going to be very, very annoying. Now, that's not to say you bought bad speakers. You can actually buy very good speakers, but what happens is you begin to blame the speaker for what you're hearing, as opposed to understanding that that print is being very faithful to the request of that size, but it's what you're giving that print that is the problem. So we here typically concentrate on getting reasonable or moderate speakers to allow you to build the speakers, build the system along, and then making the window larger. You can follow either strategy, but I want to make sure if you're getting back into audio or if you're starting your first run into audio, that what comes out of a speaker is what goes into it. So don't necessarily blame the speaker for what you're hearing. Now, certainly, all speakers are not all the same. They're not equal buddies, and some of them are real values, and some of them are very expensive, poor attempts at hi-fi. We see that at shows. I wish some of the products would just simply remain in the prototype stage and not get loose on the public, because that's where they belong. Somebody needs to think a little further about it. It's important, if you're working with a specialist retailer, that you lay all of your cards on the table quickly. And what I mean by that is the type of music you enjoy, how you like to use it, volumes, those sort of things. Are you the only person who's listening to the system, or are there others? You know, is the system meant to be your source of entertainment, the presentation of um, a live musical experience, because that's what stereo is all about, or is it merely a friend in the room? And my joking line about the friend in the room is when people want to put really, really high quality um, in ceiling or in wall speakers in a dining room, so that you know they can be entertaining when their guests are there. And I often think to myself that if you're more concerned about how the quality of music sounds when you have friends over for dinner, then your friends' conversations can't be that particularly good, because they're the reason you want to be with them, not listening to a music system. That's background sort of stuff. Shopping mall music would be the best way of describing it. So it's not that I don't want people to buy quality for their dining room, but let's think about who we're doing this for and why. So moderate quality in dining rooms is usually quite sufficient, you know, but it's your money, so to speak. The other thing is to let the presentation be done by the dealer initially. Don't come armed with whatever music you think you know um, to judge a system. Let the presentation go off cleanly by the dealer, then come back a second time, said, okay, I've thought about what you showed me. I'd like to hear it with the music that I enjoy, and go from there. Now, a number of businesses have tried to short circuit that by using streaming devices. And they hand you your cell phone or a tablet, and you think you've got choice, and away you go with selecting music. As we've discussed in other videos, streaming is not the end all and be all of quality. And in some cases, it's not the best at all, and actually may be the worst, because it's the quality of the source from which they stream that determines the quality of what you hear from the streamer itself. I experienced this with a good friend of mine who has a shop over in Pittsburgh, Stereo. And he was doing streaming from sources of music that he knew, and it sounded absolutely gorgeous. There was an album that I very much enjoyed, and I asked him to look it up and stream it. And when I heard it, um, mediocre to dreadful were basically the first two things that came to mind, which was, okay, is he playing really specialty streaming sources and all my other music is going to sound like this rat shit? Or what's going on? So I did a video about that. You can look that one up, where I compared a reissue of that album versus the original pressing of that album versus the streaming. And the quality difference between all three was significant. In the case of my album, the streaming came in second behind the original pressing. The reissue was a disaster. But I've also heard streaming on systems where I kind of go, what happened to it? You know, are we streaming FM radio? Is basically what it came down to. And so you got to be very careful about that. So while it's very convenient, yes, you don't have control over the quality itself of what's being streamed. And trust me, streamers are themselves are not all of the same quality. There can be very significant differences in their performance. So a lot of the inexpensive streamers are quite capable of being a friend in the room. So while you're doing something else, you're on your laptop, or you're building something, or you're having dinner, whatever, fine. But they're not anything to use to judge the rest of the electronics and the speakers you're considering on owning. You know, I don't mean to be rude, and it certainly is not proper. But some of the streamers are essentially the equivalent of car stereos. And if you're going to use your car stereo to charge $1,000 or $2,000 pair of speakers, well, I don't think it's going to come out well. So you'll get the wrong impression of the product you're listening to because the source itself was contaminated. So be very careful about that. The more control you have over the quality of what you're listening to, the better your chances of making a good decision. One of the beauties of the internet is not going out there and bargain hunting. That can lead to a whole host of interesting issues, particularly when it comes to support service. But where the internet can be useful is turning the question upside down. Let's say you're interested in an RX, 5000, and one of the things that the internet is very good at, and consumers are very good at, is reporting problems or deficiencies with product RX 5000. And I first became aware of this many, many years ago in the video area, where people were reporting characteristics that were not desirable that would occur in a product in a few months. And we ourselves had that experience with a couple products. But the consumers were able to identify the problem, and whether somebody was, anybody at that company was going to do anything about it. There were chipsets in some of the early surround sound receivers that were defective, and a known manufacturer produced tens of hundreds, if not thousands, of home theater receivers with this defective chip. And everybody who bought that had that problem, and the company wasn't interested in dealing with it other than saying, well, we have a new model out, maybe you should buy that instead. Well, that doesn't help you in what you already bought, which means you're going to get your butt burned, out of pocket by losing money and selling it. So that's where the web can be very useful, is to look at a product and saying, okay, are there problems with the product? How good is the manufacturer in supporting the product? I got into it with a company that I was trying to help out in Salt Lake. a young store, and the manufacturer was literally running him around in circles, um, 6 months, to simply replace a single driver in the speaker that was clearly defective. Well, you don't want to be the person who bought that speaker. And if that's how they treat, a dealer, or if that's how they treat a customer, you don't want to be the next one in line. You don't want to go there. Now, it's really important, if you're looking at those type of issues, to be very careful about the timeline. If they're talking about an event or a problem with a manufacturer that occurred 15 years ago, that information, frankly, is irrelevant. It's like someone doing a review of a business, and then when you look at, and they have the little stars and how it affects their rating and all this happy horse shit. But then you start looking at the reviews, and they're like 20 years ago. If you're going to use that standard to judge a company, then be prepared to be judged by other people for how you were 20 years ago. That's essentially what you're doing by using stale comments or stale reviews. They're irrelevant. Companies change, people change. It's really who they are or what they've been doing in the last couple of years that really gives you the picture you need to make a good, intelligent decision. And you also have to be careful when looking at those sort of things that you're not dealing with somebody who wakes up in the morning and has a bowl of Grumpies, and then goes out for lunch and buys a bag of bitches, and then comes home and, has a bag of piss-offs. There are people out there who do write reviews or comments that simply are not helpful. And sometimes they're just frankly wrong. This person has a grudge in their life because, the cat pissed on their favorite couch or something. I don't know. But it has nothing to do with the product or the company. So watch out for that in some of the comments. And it's a lot of fun because I'll look at, let's say I'll look at star ratings about things, and I'll see, a couple of little bad ones. It's like, oh, what was their problem? And I'll go looking at it. And if you read it, you kind of go like, boy, I'm sure glad I don't have that person as a customer because they're nuts. And it's true. And there are just some people who like to make a pain in the ass on themselves, and they think it's fun, regardless of the injury they inflict. So you have to be careful with that. But sorting out electrical or common problems in performance, that's where they can be very valuable. So I've given you some basic tips of how to start going about it. I'm not telling you how to do it, but I, want you to use the resources that are out there prudently. But in the end, you've got to listen to it. If you don't believe me, then pull out a magazine or a newspaper, read, or if they're still printed, I guess, something on the web. It's a review of a movie, and then go watch the movie and try to figure out what the hell is this all about. And I'll give you an example of that. There were two movies that I wanted to see. One was The Imitation Game, which is about the people who broke the Enigma machine used by the Germans during World War II. It was a brilliant movie, extremely well done, enjoyable, sad in its own way as to the truths that were involved in it. Well, I just finished watching, The King's Speech, another brilliant movie. But a movie that got an enormous amount of praise was Oppenheimer. And so I got all excited about it because it's really an interesting line. But the movie, for me and my wife, was so severely disjointed, we couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. We got halfway through the movie, and we hit eject. So, I mean, maybe somebody who had OCD enjoyed the movie, but I sure as shit didn't. Um, and it may have had great acting in it and some great lines, but um, there was no flow to it as far as I can see. Um, I don't know. Maybe they were all drug-induced flashbacks. I don't know. But I just couldn't get into it. And there are going to be products like that to you. Now, there are people who certainly love the Oppenheimer movie, you know, but when you're trying to evaluate a system for you, be aware that what somebody praises or disapproves of um, may not be consistent with your values or what your impressions are. The final thing I want to address is something that I've experienced as a dealer of certain products, particularly when other dealers within driving distance have also carried the same product. And that is the quality of the presentation by the dealer themselves of the product. And it was very difficult for me when I had someone who, um, how should we say, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket selling audio gear, and the presentations were dreadful. And they would come down here and we would like to present it to them, and they would immediately dismiss it as, I've already heard that, it's no good. And so that was removed off the table. And sometimes, if they were willing, I would, twist their ear, so to speak, to get them to listen to it here. And then the light bulb goes off in that, well, the dealer sells the same product. The dealer has no idea what they're doing. So do understand that great product can be put in the hands of poor businesses. And so the quality of the product itself is concealed by the fumbling antics of who's trying to sell it. So if you've been given the impression that something is really good and you go off and hear it and it's bad, what that throws up is a signal of, well, if I really want to pursue it, maybe I need to hear this someplace else to make sure that what I heard is in fact representative of that product. And if you have a poor demonstration of a product and then you go to another dealer and the product is really good, number one is that may help you make the purchase of that product, but it sure as hell shoots up fireworks like anything, that if there's anybody you're going to trust for buying the rest of your system, you just found them. Because if a guy can't make a shop can't make a good presentation of a product, but someone else can, why do you go back to the same, that person again for other product when he can't put it together right? Why would you go back? So in the shopping experience, you're not only evaluating the product, you're also evaluating the dealer, because they're going to be the people who you may turn to for additional advice. And if they can't put up a good sound, I doubt they're going to be able to give you good advice. So think about all these elements as you go out there and you're starting to, to buy your first system or improve a system that you have, or you're coming back into the hobby because your system is 25, 30 years old and you're just curious to see, well, can I improve what I have? It's always worth a look. But if you don't want to spend the money, then keep, your wallet in your pocket. But if you're encouraged enough and fascinated enough and realize there's something I'm really enjoying here, then pull out the wallet and be done with it. But buy quality the first time. Thank you.